friends, my name is Anna, and today we're going to be reading Being Frank. And this is a story written by Donna W. Earhart. And if you look at this cover, what do you notice? Yes, we have the boy in the middle, but what do you notice about the people around the cover? How do you think they're feeling? And based on what they're feeling, what do you think being Frank is about? Do you think that being Frank just means being a boy that's named Frank? What are your guesses about what being Frank might mean? Let's go ahead and find out. Frank was always Frank. Honesty is the best policy, he said. Now, Frank means honesty. Do you think that that's always a good thing? I don't think so. Think about a time when somebody was honest to you and it kind of hurt your feelings. Frank never lied to his schoolmates. "Your freckles remind me of the Big Dipper," he told Dottie. Dottie pulled her hood over her face. "Your singing is kind of shrieky," Frank told Carol. Carol stomped away. Frank always told the truth to adults. "Your breath smells funny," he told his teacher, Mrs. Aroma. She sent Frank to the principal's office. "Your toupee looks like my pet weasel," he told Principal Wiggins. Mr. Wiggins called Frank's mom. "You wouldn't get so many wrinkles if you didn't glare at me like that," Frank told his mom on the way home. "And by the way, you're speeding." Now, pause for a second and look at the people in the pictures. How do you think they're feeling about Frank being Frank? Do you think that they seem very happy? What do you think they're gonna do about Frank being too honest? I want to pause and think about that for a second. And Frank was always honest with police officers. "Yes, officer," he said. "She knew how fast she was going. I told her." Look at that. The only person happy with Frank being Frank are the police officers. Frank was very proud of being Frank. But other than police officers, adults weren't as impressed with Frank's honesty as he thought they should be. "You'll have wrinkles one day too," Mom said, rubbing on some lotion. "Some things are better left unsaid," said Mr. Wiggins, adjusting his toupee. "You don't have to say everything you're thinking," said Mrs. Aroma, popping a mint in her mouth. Now these people are really upset. Do you think that there's a better way that Frank could have told them without making them upset? Let's go even farther. Do you think that Frank needed to tell them what he was thinking? Do you think that they're better off with it being said? Frank's schoolmates weren't impressed either. "My freckles do not look like the Big Dipper," Dottie said. "And my mother says I shouldn't listen to you." "I'm still going to sing in the talent show at the school carnival tomorrow, but I'm not going to ride the Ferris wheel with you," Carol told Frank. "But we always ride the Ferris wheel together," Frank whispered. Everyone was upset, and Frank wasn't so happy either. Frank was really proud of being honest at the beginning of the story. Does he seem happy now? What do you think is going to happen? clipped his toenails, and alphabetized his bug collection, but he didn't feel any better. So he walked down the block to Grandpa's house. Grandpa Ernest was on the porch clipping his toenails. "Incoming!" he yelled. Frank ducked. "What's up, Frank?" Grandpa said. "Everyone is mad at me for being frank. I'm not sure honesty is the best policy anymore." "That used to happen to me too," said Grandpa. How do you think that Grandpa and Frank are the same? Because they seem very similar so far. It looks like Grandpa is about to give him some advice on how to keep people from being upset. What do you think he might say? Mrs. Peacock walked by and straightened her massive hat. "It's new. Do you like it, Ernest?" Frank thought the hat looked like the flower store on Mrs. Peacock's head. "Well," Grandpa said, "there are an awful lot of flowers up there, but my favorite is the purple one in the middle." "Thank you," Mrs. Peacock boomed. "Toodaloo." Do you think that he was honest with her? It was obvious that he didn't like her hat, but he still told her something nice. Do you think that's a good idea? Frank couldn't believe his ears. "Grandpa, you lied." "No, Frank, I told the truth. I really do like the purple flower best. I talked about the good things on her hat instead of the not good things." Grandpa's best friend, Mr. Pickles, pulled up in his truck. "Try this relish," he called, handing Grandpa a jar and a spoon. "I've got a cold and can't taste a thing." So now that Grandpa told Frank that you can tell somebody something nice instead of the not so nice, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think that they're going to like the relish or not like the relish? Grandpa scooped a spoonful of relish into his mouth. His nose twitched, his eyes watered, his hair stood on end. "Give it to me straight, Ernest," said Mr. Pickles. "I can't sell it if it's no good." Grandpa wiped his eyes. "More sugar, less pepper." Mr. Pickles grinned and shook Grandpa's hand. "Back to the drawing board. Thanks for your help." "Grandpa, he didn't get mad at you." "That's right." Grandpa drank some water. "He asked me for the truth, and I gave it to him." Frank sighed. "So I shouldn't give the truth unless someone asks for it?" "You should always give people the truth," Grandpa said. "You just have to find the right way to serve it." So now it seems that Frank has some work to do. Do you think that things are going to go a little bit differently with his friends? The next afternoon at the school carnival, Miss Aroma laughed like a horse. Frank said, "You tell great jokes." When Mr. Wiggins did a weird dance, Frank said, "Impressive spin, sir." When Frank saw Dottie, he said, "I like dots better than squares." And when Carol sang, Frank said, "You sure can hit those high notes." Carol smiled at Frank. "Dottie and I are going to ride to the Ferris wheel. Want to come?" How did Dottie and Carol change with Frank? Remember, do you think that they wanted Frank to ride the Ferris wheel beforehand? Why do you think that they do now? On the way home, Frank gave his mom a poem he wrote for her. "Mom, your hair looks nice today. I only see a little gray." And when she smiled, Frank decided not to mention the wrinkles around the corners of her mouth. The next day, while Frank helped Grandpa in the garden, Mrs. Peacock stopped by again. "You were right," she said to Grandpa. "That other hat had too many flowers." Just then, Mr. Pickles arrived with a new jar of relish for Grandpa to try. "Excuse me a moment," Grandpa said to Mrs. Peacock. What's happening in this page? It looks like Mrs. Peacock and Mr. Pickles are taking Grandpa's advice instead of getting mad. Do you think that means that it's working? "So, what do you think of my hat?" Mrs. Peacock asked. But this time, she wasn't asking Grandpa, she was asking Frank. Oh no, this is a test. Frank looked at Grandpa on the porch with Mr. Pickles. Grandpa was taking another spoonful of relish, and he wasn't drinking any water. Frank knew just what to say. "I've never seen a hat like that before. It must be one of a kind." "Thank you," Mrs. Peacock beamed. "Toodaloo." Do you think that he said the right thing? "So how is it being Frank today?" Grandpa asked. "Well, Grandpa, I still think that honesty is the best policy," said Frank. "But now, I know it's best served with more sugar and less pepper." The end. So now that we finished with the story, I want you to think about the main character, Frank. How did he change throughout the story? In the beginning of the story, what do you think he was like? I want you to pause the video and think of 3 characteristics you can use to describe Frank. I think I would describe Frank as honest, unaware, and a little bit clumsy with his words. And think about how people react to Frank. I don't think that they like him very much in the beginning of the story because he says things that hurt their feelings. Now, how does he change throughout the story? He meets with his grandpa, and after learning that there's a better way to be honest with people, how does he change? I think that throughout the story, Frank learns that while being honest is very important, there's ways to say it without being rude. And finally, I want you to stop for a second and think about how you could use this in your life. Are there times where you find yourself being too frank? Or are there times where people are too frank to you? How could you use this to change that? Go ahead and think about that, and thank you for reading the story with me.